Hi, everyone, and welcome to a webinar hosted by the Cloud Standards Customer Council. This is Tracy Berardi, Program Manager of the CSCC. I'll be moderating our presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us. In February, we just released version 2.0 of the CSCC's paper, Migrating Applications to Public Cloud Services, Roadmap for Success. So the heart of this guide is a cloud migration roadmap that covers 6 steps for a successful migration. It outlines considerations for assessing your applications and workloads, building a business case, developing a technical approach, adopting a flexible integration model, addressing security and compliance requirements, and managing the migration to the cloud. So version 2.0 has been updated to include more guidance on containers, virtual machines, and serverless computing, as well as the increasing use of hybrid cloud solutions. So again, I'm Tracy here, your moderator for the day, and I'm joined by 3 presenters who worked on V2 of the paper. Mr. Claude Boudoir, he's lead editor. He's owner of and principal at Sebe IT and Knowledge Management, a consultancy. Claude is on the steering committee of the Cloud Standards Customer Council. Mr. Ash Hida, he's a cloud architect at Wipro. Ash has been involved in technology transformation and business strategy for the last 17 plus years and focusing heavily on security, governance, and cloud for the last decade or so. And also we're joined by Mr. Reddy Carey, IT security manager at Schlumberger, and Schlumberger is the world's largest oil field services company. So Reddy's very focused on cloud security and other aspects in that regard. So there are other members of the Cloud Standards Customer Council that have contributed to the first publication of the paper, as well as V2, and you can find the list of contributors. It's on page 3 of the white paper. So in the Attachments and Links tab here on BrightTalk, we've included a link to the paper in its entirety that you can download. There's also a PDF download of today's webinar presentation that you can take with you. And as quick background, so this paper and the presentation today is brought to you by the Cloud Standards Customer Council, an end-user advocacy group dedicated to accelerating cloud successful adoption. And we tap into our large membership base and liaison partners comprised of standards development organizations, open source communities, and end-user companies to publish vendor-neutral guides on important cloud computing topics. So on this slide, you can see, last year, 2017, we published quite a few papers in reference architectures. And this year, this is our first deliverable in February, V2 of Migrating Apps. We're also working on a cloud workforce paper right now that we're expecting to deliver in May. So stay tuned, and we hope you'll join us on upcoming webinars. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Claude to get started. Claude, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy, and welcome everyone. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the paper before turning over to my colleagues in order to give you a step-by-step description of what is really the meat of the paper. The structure of the paper is that there is a front-end part which is about the motivations for migration and the various considerations that people should apply to making the decision to migrate certain applications and workloads to the cloud, whether it is to a public cloud or which is the main focus of the paper, but also obviously to hybrid clouds, since hybrid clouds have some of the characteristics of a public cloud. And as Tracy mentioned, the emphasis on hybrid clouds is something that we added since version 1, when we published version 1, which was a little over 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago. Hybrid clouds were not as important as they are now. So we provide that context in the first part of the paper, and then logically enough, there are 6 sections, one for each of the steps, And these are recommended steps. I mean, nothing in this is normative, obviously. It's not a standard. The CSCC doesn't do standards, but it provides guidance to users. So these are recommended steps that customers of the cloud should take to make sure that their project or program of migration is successful. And then we have a conclusion, obviously, and we have substantial appendices. So we have appendices that explain in more detail what are the types of applications that are more or less appropriate for migration to the cloud. We have appendices on the technical approach to migration, and we have a fairly extensive list of bibliographic references for further information on some of these topics. The paper, as Tracy mentioned, is the link is in the attachment tab of the little accordion on the right-hand side of your screen where it says attachment and links. And we can already see that 40 of you have already clicked on some of those links. The paper is free and can be used without limitation. It's in the public domain. There's a copyright notice on page 2, and we just request that people honor that copyright notice and use it if they distribute the paper further or even if they quote it. Again, what is new in version 2? For those of you who know version 1 and have used it, these are the reasons why you want to download this and follow it. We strengthened the motivation section, in particular in terms of business cases. We became much more explicit about what are the cost and savings issues, as well as the business benefits that may accrue from migrating to the cloud. We explained the difference between applications and workloads. The words were used in version 1, but there was not a substantial definition of what we mean by workload in terms of being a combination of applications that contribute to a business process, not only applications, but also platform, operating system, middleware, etc. And then that resulted in Appendix A, exploring this in more detail. So you have now much more guidance about how to slice and dice, if you want, your portfolio of IT systems in order to determine what should be migrated. In step 1, which is about the business case, we've improved the cost and savings sections. Obviously, in the last 3 years, people have learned more about what are the key aspects of the economics of the cloud that influence your decision. In step 3, the technical approach, and Ash will describe that to us in a moment, we've included 2 new types of something as a service, containers as a service and functions as a service. So we no longer just talk about SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. We also talk about CaaS and FaaS. And this is described. We also added a consideration about patterns of migration and integration and architectural patterns for the cloud, essentially. We've expanded in step 4 the integration and migration model because we make the distinction between microservices, cloud-native applications, cloud-ready applications, etc. Microservices, again, were not really in the picture 4 years ago, and now it is a major consideration, a major architectural decision for the redesign of the design or redesign of applications to move to the cloud. Step 5, which was about security and privacy, we've leveraged other work that the CSCC did last year on data residency in collaboration with the object management group, and we added the data residency issues to that step 5. And obviously, when we talk about privacy and data residency in 2018, the GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union is going to have an impact or likely impact, and we describe those risks. We revised the migration procedure, which is in step 6, but also in more detail in Appendix B, and we updated the bibliography. So there's quite a bit of new material. I can tell you that as the lead editor who had to integrate all that, there's almost no part of the paper that was left untouched. At the same time, it's clear the spirit of the paper is still the same, but there's a lot more detail and options that have been added. So if you have a copy of version 1, put it to bed respectfully, and then download version 2 and use version 2. So with this, I am going to move to step 1. To show you the slide on step 1, and I'm going to turn it over to Ashida to present the first 3 steps to you. Over, Ash.
Thank you, Claude. I think you have captured the gist of the version 2, the latest version, pretty well, very succinctly. Thank you so much, Claude, for that. Now, what essentially is important here is while we are making a migration to the cloud, it is essential that this particular steps which are provided as guidance, they offer a perspective. Say, for example, Tracy has already captured those, but let me revisit those again, like assessing your applications and workload, or building a business case, or developing a technical approach, adopting a flexible integration model, understanding the security, privacy, data requirements, and then finally managing the migration. Those are few of the key things which determine the success of cloud migration. So let us visit the very first thing, which is looking at the portfolio, the application portfolio, and understanding what can go to the cloud and what cannot go to the cloud. Now, this go, no go decision is not only going to help us understand what is actually going to the cloud, but it is also going to give us a perspective on prioritizing, and that will lessen our burden. So some of the best practices which are recommended in this particular paper are that you need to basically identify the applications and map them to the business components. And certain criteria become very important, like say, for example, you all know it, but just to reiterate, the complexity of the architecture, the impact to the business, the transactional dependencies, the sensitivity of the data that resides within the application, and leveraging the cloud's inherent advantages such as elasticity. And of course, we have to also consider that there is a benefit which is coming from ending legacy support. So those are few of the things which are very important criteria while looking at the applications. But let us understand what are the application features that is going to help us in choosing migration to cloud, right? Oftentimes, customers are looking for a lift and shift, easy, the first thing which can go to the cloud. Now, what are those features which will help us identify those low-hanging fruits? And, the most important thing is the application should have loose coupling, it should have APIs, it needs rapid resource provisioning, and application or workloads that require operating expenses which are really high. So now this list is definitely not exhaustive, but those are few of the features that will help us identify the low-hanging fruits. So just taking a little pause here before I go into the next topic, which is basically the cloud readiness assessment. So let us understand some of the aspects of readiness assessment. Now, there are several dimensions to the readiness assessment, and those range from business, like the impact to the business, the application lifecycle itself, the application architecture, the data, infrastructure, security, and integration aspects. I will delve into the details not delve into details, but let me at a very high level explain some of the components here. For example, the organization's readiness for adopting cloud becomes an important aspect. So also the impact to the business or the level of risk which they are ready to tolerate, right? So those are few of the components, and of course, all this is driven by the culture of innovation as well as the need to achieve customer-centric KPIs. So those are features, like if you see that an organization has those features, it becomes very easy to, I would consider that we have won the battle 50% here. Now, let us understand the application life cycle. Now, oftentimes we may see that the applications are coded pretty old, right? So, like say if your application is coded somewhere in 1988, maybe some kind of COBOL or some kind of language which is not likely to suit on the platform or the infrastructure for the target model, right? So, you may want to re-architecture that. But if there is something which was coded, say, somewhere in 2012, 2013, right, you may want to refactor those or rehost those, right? There are certain criteria, and those criteria are mentioned in the attached papers here. But essentially, what I mean to say is basically we will have to look into those aspects of applications. Now, let us understand some of the aspects of the architecture which are equally important. There is a wholesome trend in the industry. In fact, the way we see the industry, almost wholesome number of customers are moving towards a microservice, API, containerized kind of environment or other mode of development. Now, that will become an essential aspect as we move forward. Lift and shift is basically, of course, giving us the immediate leverage, but eventually we will see that thing emerging as a main or the main bulwark here. Now, let us look at some of the data aspects. Now, data aspects, what we see is, of course, we all know that confidentiality and integrity are equally important, but it is also equally important to understand between the components, how is the data getting protected, right? So we are always looking at data in motion or data at rest getting protected, right? But between components, when they are talking, we have to also look at that. And of course, compliance, legal, regulatory, and data residency components are very, very important. And all that means is basically we have to have a very strong governance, and we have to have a very well-carved RACI to manage what we want to do here. So there are other aspects which are basically security, which I would like to touch here. And basically on security, the way the best practices come here are like doing threat modeling and identifying individual risks and ensuring that proper treatment is done for those threats. So, and clear responsibilities are carved out there. So while we are doing that, it is important that we build a defense in depth stack here. And I won't call it technology, but it should be encompassing technology, people, processes, and the responsibility matrix will be driving the service model and giving that clarity here. So, essentially what it means is there are complexities on the security aspect which have to be really understood. And that is a component which becomes very important while going to the cloud. Of course, there are other components also like integration and operations. And they need a very, very close review. Say, for example, when the applications are talking with each other, right? So it is it is happening through the controls, through the data, or through the presentation layer, right? And it can be that the applications, it may be a system of record, or it can be talking with a system of record. But one thing is definitely sure, that there is an Active Directory which is allowing access to that. So, those components become very important. Of course, there are other components which are equally important, like the protocols or the utilities, the run libraries, right, which are providing the performance, the frequency of connection, and the amount of data, and all those things which are getting determined by several of these components, right? So the integration also becomes equally important. So having talked about all this, let me talk about the operational aspect of it. Let us presume that your cloud is now, your apps have gone into the cloud. So you have to manage the run and manage it, right? So a responsibility matrix is equally important here. Having a very well carved out and robust RACI should be a very helpful place to start with. Okay, so having said that, let me go to the next step, which is developing the business case for migrating applications to the cloud. Now, we know that, while making a business case, we need to really have a very solid cloud strategy. And of course, the primary driver here are driving the CapEx to the OpEx kind of model and having faster deployment elasticity. But at the same time, it is really important and pertinent here to understand if the applications have any pain points. Presume that your business units, they have any pain points, those should be also looked at this moment of time. And of course, the redressal will depend upon the cost. But the bottom line, basically, those aspects are very important while capturing the business case. Now, while we are talking about the business case, and we definitely look at the business impact, like, what is the impact on the revenue or the customer engagement or acquisition or even user satisfaction or certain parameters like time to market, right? Those, they become important. At the same time, for the cost analysis, of course, there are other components which are equally important here. Like, we have to understand not only the as-is cost of the application, or it's not just the application. It is not existing in isolation. It is not in a silo, right? There are so many other things which are going there, right? We have to factor in that cost, and then we have to factor in the cost after we take it to the cloud, right? So the cloud service management, the security aspects, the license management, the application, the designing of it, the protection of the data, application deployment and testing, application maintenance, and also retraining your resources, right? Retooling and retraining your resources become equally important here. So those are few of the things which are important here, but all these things are going to be determined or going to help in determining the service level, right? So the application availability, performance, application security, the privacy, and the regulatory component are the underpinning aspects here, right? So having talked about those, let me talk about the technical approach which needs to be adopted here. Now, what we see is basically on the for the target state, the way I look at it is, and most of you have been seeing the same thing here. So what we see is that there are different flavors which are available. We can either do a platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, or as Claude mentioned, we can do component as a service or function as a service. So there are different flavors which are possible here. We are going to be talking about those, and then we are going to also be talking about the DevOps capabilities, because DevOps becomes the backbone of all the cloud eventually. So, cloud and DevOps, they pretty much go hand in hand. So bottom line, basically, we'll talk about DevOps. And of course, it is a vast topic. We cannot be addressing everything there, but I'm going to basically be talking at a very high level or alluding to some of the key components there. Now, let us understand what are the different components on the flavors, right? So you can either go for a platform as a service, and what that means is basically the platform is going to provide you the operating system, it is going to provide the servers, and it's going to basically provide the databases, right? It offers the ability to run scripts, services, and there are tools which are automating the setup, reporting, logging, monitoring, auto-scaling, right? So those are few of the fundamental things which are expected of a platform here, right? Now, let us understand what does the software have to do. The components of the software are laid on this application, on these servers, right, along with their databases as well as their stored procedures, right? Those are the things which are part of the software stack, right? That is going to be important here. Now, if we are going to be looking at infrastructure as a service, what we see here is the CSP has a lesser responsibility as compared to platform as a service. So the entire software stack, whether it is code or the underlying code of the operating system, they become equally important here. But, those are most commonly either enabled via virtual machine, wherein the customer is getting a shared server, or a bare metal server, wherein the customer is getting a dedicated server, right? And it all depends upon the requirement. It may be compliance, it may be high performance, and the customer may choose for going for bare metal, or they may go for shared service. But irrespective, what is important here is basically the infrastructure as a service is enabled most commonly either using the VM server as a shared server or a bare metal server. And there are, of course, certain more variants here to the approach, like, the target architecture can have single tenancy, multi-tenancy, or a single image on multiple instances, stuff of that sort. And then it gets a whole lot complicated. But just to keep it simple, basically, that is how we are looking at infrastructure as a service. Now, let me talk about component as a service. And this is a concept which Claude was alluding to. So component as a service has multiple platforms as a service plus function as a service. But the underpinning fundamental tenet here is portability of the containers. So that's an important thing which is drives the integration between this multiple platforms and whether it be platforms, whether it be infrastructure, all those components, integration of all this and having a multi-cloud kind of environment is enabled or is going to be enabled via component as a service. Now, one of the final things which I want to address here is about function as a service. What ideally happens here is event invokes an application logic via a web or mobile using HTTP. So the benefits of going for a function as a service, which is of course an emerging trend here, right? So what we see is that the advantages are having a high availability, auto scaling, load balancing. Of course, the risks are definitely with the load balancers and the HTTP plugins. But if you take care of those, you can definitely enable function as a service. Now, having said this, let us talk a little bit about DevOps. It needs a wholesome discussion there. I am going to admit this upfront. But DevOps is going to become a key differentiator here. And what we see is basically automated build, test, deploy. Those are going to be enabled by DevOps. And of course, the DevOps team, the application team is going to support itself. So, of course, it is equally important that we not only put DevOps, but it is a matter of culture, and we also have to see to it that there is adequate governance embedded while we are adopting DevOps. Now, if I have talked about those, there are other aspects also which are equally important, like the other technical considerations which should be factored in at the beginning itself while you're considering migration to cloud are like, you have to look at your skills inventory. You have to look at the security, not only the future aspects of security which are important here, but also look at your past history. What are your vulnerabilities? Those are equally important. Now, another aspect which we have already talked about is integration, monitoring, management, scalability, availability, backup. But one of the key things which we consider important is baking into the design itself, the business continuity and disaster planning. So those are a few of the aspects which should be talked about. Now, having said those, I would turn over this to Satyakari, who's going to be providing the next aspect, talking about the flexible integration model. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ash. So I'm going to talk about this adoption of the flexible integration model. And for application integrations, it is important to take several considerations. So it is important to have a corporate strategy or direction and roadmap to take decisions. And when it comes to the reestablishing the integrations for migrating or migrated applications, then technical teams and business teams need to discuss, decide, and document their desires, such as the needs. So, an example like end-to-end workflows, a master data management, or a single sign-on, those are all important aspects. So when it comes to documenting those, they need to involve the key people and make sure they question does this application need a master database data integration, or what's the requirement for the single sign-on, etc. Then they need to get into the scope where they need to question: is this an application migration from a existing cloud to a different cloud, or on-premise to a cloud, etc. So then they need to get into the types of integrations required. Does this application require a controlled application, initiated workflows, or a data integration, that is just sharing the same data between the multiple applications, etc. So once they have all these information gathered, there are pretty good templates available in various organizations. So I think you're better off using one of those templates to follow through. The questions may be slightly different in one template to the other template, but you probably need to use one of those templates so that you don't miss the key questions. Once you have those, then you need to start the principles. So decide organization's application integration strategy. That's very important. Once you have that, if your applications are using a modern integration architecture, then application support teams may be able to quickly realign integration workflows in the new environment. If not, you need to use different techniques and flexible, be flexible and follow the standards. That's important thing. If you don't follow the standards, or if your users or your technical teams are not following the standards, then there may be a possibility, the things may not work quite well, down the road. So you got to be, on top of these at the beginning. Once you have these, the standards and, everything is sorted out, and, you need to look at the legacy flows. If you have a legacy flow in your applications, you probably better off considering upgrading those to modern architecture during the migration. To make this work, classify each flow and based on the effort and other relevant factors. An example, like a t-shirt size, a small, medium, large, or extra large, or the other way around is, low, medium, high. It depends, whatever works for you, your organization, or the naming features, or the different ways, you represent the complexity of some of these things. You use those same jargon and document those so that what's the effort, etc. required. Upon completing the classification, the effort and resource requirements and priorities need to be established. Then review these various integration patterns and decide options that best fit your organization needs. I can't tell you, what's the best for your organization, right? You need to look at it, various aspects. It could be redesigning legacy services one by one, or bundling multiple applications that share integrations and migrating them together, or the other appropriate options that are secure and fit to your organization needs. My recommendation, at the beginning of the cloud enablement of these applications, try to identify applications that have fewer integrations, less complex, low business impact. Once your teams gain experience, you could consider complex migrations, right? So I'm moving on to the step 5, addressing the security, privacy, and data residency requirements. As most of you are aware, and compliance, security, and privacy are key issues that concerns cloud service customers the most. And data residency has been added to the list in the last few years. These concerns are not new. These have existed since the first forms of IT outsourcing were introduced many years ago. These requirements could be, it changes from sector to sector. For example, finance, health, energy, education, etc. They all have different requirements, right? Yeah, probably, if you are in the healthcare, you may see your requirements are much stringent, whereas, the same kind of, things the finance guys, see, in the banking industry or etc. Right? So they know only their side of the things, and they probably don't pay attention or don't know much about the other sectors. But each individual sector has its own requirements and measures. So when it comes to the compliance concerns, these could be imposed by external entities such as a government or a regulatory body or your own internal IT or legal, right? So the example, data storage or processing location, or a two-factor authentication for privileged user access, such as root or super user access, right? So when it comes to the security aspect, it involves multiple concerns. What intrusion detection systems we have in place? Will it really work? How do you know if something goes wrong or something happens, right? Do you trust providers, system admins, etc., right? If you need more details, I suggest refer CSCC Security for Cloud Computing 10 steps to ensure success for more details, right? So moving on to the privacy aspect, again, it is closely related to security, but it has more implications. For example, the disclosure of personally identifiable information, which is PII, about your users or customers to people who do not have a right to access it, could cause a major damage to an organization. It includes, but not limited to, the loss of trust of their customer base, reputation in the marketplace, significant financial impact. As Cloud mentioned, the data residency is another aspect. Again, it is somewhat related to privacy, but it is distinct because there is a complex and contradictory web of laws and regulations that limit where certain types of data may be located, even when such data does not contain the personally identifiable information. Again, if you need more details, please refer CSCC paper, Data Residency Challenges, for the details. Now that we have examined the risks and threats that arise when migrating an application to the cloud, it turns out that doing so may in fact improve application security. This is based on the following facts. So the fact one, cloud service providers have, in all likelihood, more expert resources at their disposal than many of their customers. The fact number two, once your data is held in the cloud service, an external attacker who specifically wants to gain access to your information no longer knows exactly where to attack. Right? So if your management and business teams' concerns are addressed after reviewing the above, you could proceed to the next step, which is basically the migrating the applications to the cloud. Yeah. So once you have whys, whats, and hows of the application, so you need to start the migration process, a business plan, and a detailed migration plan, which is basically the critical success factor. To develop the plan, you may need to consider pre-migration, migration, and post-migration tasks and tests. To make that happen, you need to have, the storage, servers, network, security, responsibility matrix, or the application installation kits, and the steps for installation, integrations, backups, and restore steps, or a disaster recovery steps, incident reporting and supporting, et cetera, right? So it's just, pretty much same as what you do typically on-prem or, or a private cloud. However, you need to make sure, you have all these documented and, you have a tick mark or a checklist, I would say, tick mark each of those steps, once you have fulfilled those, right? Once you have all these in place, execute required technical tests, right? Then you need to involve your business teams and make sure they execute the business use cases. This is very important. If they don't do any, business use case execution, they don't know whether, the service works or not at the end of the day, right? So before you do any of the production migration, you need to make sure you have all this in place. Then if there are no major issues, if there are any major issues found, technical teams needs to work on those and address those issues. If no major issues found or reported, you need to prepare a runbook, which usually contains a task sequence, a resource details, and a timelines, etc. Then you need to present that to your business teams or business owners and the management. Once you have an approval from their, the blessing from the business owners and the management, and you need to work on the communication. It is very key. The communication. If you miss one person, that makes your life. I would say at 3 o'clock, 3 a.m. call. Okay, so we don't want to get into that kind of situation after doing all this good work. Right. So either you use the business teams to send out the communication, or you send out whatever is your corporate policy. Make sure the communication is clear and approved, etc. before you send it out, and make sure it reaches to the right people, meaning the applications, users, as well as the any other dependencies in the integration dependencies. So they all need to know about the migration and service interruptions, or that service become available, and they need to test those applications, etc. Yeah. Once you execute the migration, and make sure you follow up with your business owners as well as the key business users, right? So that's what actually gives you the success factor. So once your business users are happy and your management didn't receive any complaints about this migration, you can sleep. Okay. All right. So that's all I have, and I'm going to pass it to Tracy.
Thank you. Ready? This is Tracy. Great. Actually, there we go. Perfect. Thank you, Ash, as well, for walking us through these 6 steps that are in the paper. I just want to remind you again, too, that in the attachments tab, there's a link to the full paper. It's a very comprehensive paper, and this is one of our most read guides. So I encourage you to take a copy of that with you. And we aim to update our papers, every couple of years, because this technology is maturing so quickly. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We do have some time for questions. So now is a great time. If you have any questions, just enter them into the questions tab, and we'll spend the next 10-15 minutes. We can address those. If you're interested in getting involved, you're welcome to join the Cloud Standards Customer Council. It's a free membership. This is a program that's managed by the OMG, or Object Management Group, a software standards consortium headquartered in Massachusetts. The Cloud Council launched about 7 years ago now, and we're chartered to work with standards development organizations, open source project leads, and our very large member base to publish this content. So we have about 27 papers at this point in time in our resource hub. So if you'd like to be alerted as we have new papers and version updates, you can sign up on our site. We'll add you to our mailing list. There's also an option to join a working group if you'd like to contribute to a piece of content. just like Ash and Reddy did on V2 of the guide, just visit our site, cloud-council.org. There's a join a working group link right in the top left, or you see this direct URL here. It's just working groups. Yeah, and at the very bottom of the slide, the resource hub link, that's where you'll find all of these papers. They're open access, free, and please use them and share them. I think you'll find throughout the papers there's references to standards of practice, and other resources within. So we encourage you to get more involved. This last slide on the presentation, I went ahead and pulled out some papers that we think you would find useful. These are also referenced within V2 of the guide, so you'll see them in the works cited, also in the back of the paper. The questions are starting to come in. Let's see.
Tracy, while the questions are coming in, this is Claude. I will add, we also have a LinkedIn group, so for people who are interested, you can just join our LinkedIn group. We have a pretty substantial number of people in it now, and that's a place where some people may be comfortable having discussions.
Yes, that's great. Yep, it's just Cloud Standards Customer Council, and we'll let you in. It is a moderated, but we'll notice when you ask to join and when you can pop right in. What we do is we share. There's also a draft process as we publish the paper, so we will also share when a paper is in an external draft form. If you'd like to view it at that time, provide feedback. We do that through the LinkedIn group as well, and then we announce when things are formally published and ready to go. As well as when we plan to write a new paper, those papers don't write themselves. They require some work, but we can distribute the work between a number of people. I think we had something like 8 or 10 co-authors on this paper. So sometimes someone can just take a small section and write it or rewrite it, and then you get acknowledged in the acknowledgments. So let's go ahead with the first question. I think that one is for Reddy, given that he just talked about the steps. Step 6 and the mock migration. So, Reddy, if you see the question, can you answer it?
Yeah. So the question is is a mock migration really worth it, or they commonly done, or just a best practice? My recommendation, is it's really worth it. Especially when you are, starting this migration, or if you have a complex migration, complex application, I would say, right? So in between, once you establish the migration path and you have done a couple of migrations, probably you would be better off migrating, applications within the similar category, like medium or low risk migrations, right? But whereas when you are doing a high risk migration or high complex application migration, I would really you try to do this mock and make sure everything is working, and performance and user access and et cetera, and backup recoveries, et cetera, whatever I mentioned in this slide. So that's very important. That actually helped. Yeah, we found some issues, and we were able to address those quickly.
Thanks, Reddy. Claude and Ash, any other thoughts you would add?
Yeah, absolutely. Reddy captured it pretty well, but on the same lines, I would like to add that as we do the mock migration, we also build a script for ourselves for the next set of waves which are coming up here, right? So, it is, in my opinion, it is essential that we do mocks. That's a fundamental thing if we are at all planning to move towards cloud.
Thank you, Ash.
I would just add that whether you want to do a mock migration or not is a little bit like whether you want to buckle up when you get in your car. It takes a little bit more time, but statistically, it saves more lives than it kills people, and it might be the same for the health of your project. If you prefer to live dangerously, that could be your choice, but you're potentially causing a lot of trouble in your company for the employees, etc. If you have an unexpected problem that happens during a migration and you haven't done a mock migration to try to forecast or discover those problems in advance. To which extent are you really simulating everything completely, such as stopping all the production applications, etc., and then restoring things? That's up to you. You may be able to modulate that a little bit, but I would definitely at least do a tabletop exercise, if not a real going through the whole process. You need to do something to be ready and to have made sure. I think the point that Ready made, you need to absolutely make sure that everyone who's going to be involved in the real migration is aware and that you communicate with them, that you didn't leave anyone in the dark about what it is that you're going to do, because that can be a killer.
Thanks, Claude. Next question, is there a guideline document for iPaaS standards having a vendor-neutral approach? And for people that may not be familiar, what does iPaaS stand for? Integration Platform as a Service. And I know from in terms of the CSCC, that isn't something that we have documented yet, but maybe Claude, you have some thoughts or know of another resource.
I don't particularly know about iPaaS standards. As you said, it's something that on our list of things to do in the future. I know that Gartner Group, unsurprisingly, has done some work on iPaaS. They have an iPaaS Magic Quadrant. They have even a report on the comparison of the top 20 iPaaS approaches or platforms. There's several vendors, of course, who offer things like that. In particular, Dell has something on that. IBM, of course, has papers on this, and including a sort of index paper or web page on iPaaS with multiple parts. So there's some literature out there, definitely. We at the CSCC have not done yet an analysis of that has been published. But that's a good suggestion. I mean, we periodically have steering committee meetings where we consider what it is that we're going to do next in what order. So we'll take that question on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. So this is the first time I've heard of CAS and FAS, that's containers as a service and function as a service. Are these new trends that I should read up on? I'll open that up to all three of you.
I think that one is probably for Ash.
These are interesting days in cloud. The way cloud is evolving, we are seeing a very different momentum coming here. Let me address a couple of things. One is basically component or containers as a service, which has multiple platforms, and there is a function as a service component as well. But this is one emerging domain which is confluencing with other aspects. Say, for example, we are talking about network virtualization, serverless, right? Detachable network interfaces, orchestration, a multi-cloud environment. Earlier we never envisioned that so many things are going to be they are going to be interacting, right? Or they are going to basically confluencing. That's the best word I can see here. So, this emerging trend is going to offer a very different business capability. But one of the fundamental things which is required here is the portability of the container. So that's how I would say that for component as a service, that portability of the container is a fundamental tenet or aspect which is important here. Now, there is also a little bit of variation in the definition. Some call it as composite as a service, but those definitions will eventually, as we keep moving forward, we see the different facets of the interaction here or what people are trying to say. We will see more closure on that, and we will have more crisper sense out of it. But at this moment of time, Tracy, what you talked about, component as a service, essentially consists of multiple platforms and functions coming together and integrating in such a way that they are independent, they are integrated, they have their own standards, and they have a proprietary technology, and they are enabling business to a higher level of capability.
Thank you. And then this is more of a comment just written in that agreeing that it would be a good idea for the CSCC to cover more of iPaaS as well. Okay, so noting that comment. And I think we have time for one more question. If anyone has a burning thought, if not, we're all set with those questions. Did you, Claude or Reddy, want to add anything to the discussion on containers and function as a service?
I'm good.
Okay. Excellent. Well, our next paper, as I was saying, due out in May. It's all about cloud-enabled workforce, skills, training, certifications. We're knee-deep in that right now, and we look forward to delivering this new paper. So stay tuned. And if you'd like to get involved, please visit cloud-council.org to become a member, join a working group. Thank you again, Claude, Ash, and Reddy, and everyone for tuning in today. Have a nice rest of the week. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.